Welcome to a room full of pros and cons with your hosts, John Askew and Tim Stark.
Okay, so A Room Full of Pros and Cons is the title, and that sounds like one that's got a story behind it, if ever I've heard one. Is it a comment on even releasing an album in the ADHD instant fix world that we now live in, or what's the meaning behind it?
Well, for the benefit of those people who perhaps English isn't your first language, pros and cons, the good things and the bad things, and obviously pros and cons, prostitutes and criminals.
All right.
Right? It's a reference to the music industry. It's a reference to the things I like and the things I don't like, the people that are there to in some way fuck you over and the ones who are genuine. It's a play on, every conceivable good thing and bad thing about the industry in which we operate in, essentially. And it's a slight piss take at every single green room experience I've ever had.
Right. If we are being very honest, it is your first album in a very long time. I think 2006 and 2008 were the first two.
Yeah.
So there's quite a gulf between that. What's the reason behind it?
I don't know is the answer. I guess COVID came along and the world stopped and I found myself in my studio working constantly, and it enabled me to start seeing a cohesive connection between a number of tracks that would go on to be this album. It also gave me the opportunity to produce a lot more music and spend a lot more time working on tracks. Yeah, I don't know. And going back to the original first point you make, whether there is any point in doing an album in this time, I don't know the answer to that question. And it's something that is a topic that I not only have to deal with for myself on a regular basis, but also with the artists that I manage. We are living in a truncated consumption period, and by that I mean music on Spotify traditionally is 3.5 minute stream edits of extended mixes that are longer. The majority of playlists, curated playlists on Spotify, are only accepting tracks that are under 3.5 to 4 minutes, because people's attention spans are so short. So as a result, is there any point in doing an album, and especially an album with 16 tracks in it? I don't know. But at the end of the day, when I die and the only thing left behind is my musical legacy, let's say, on streaming platforms, this is the body of work that I want to be associated with me.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so whether people only get 2 tracks in and move on to something else, or people...
So this is the definitive John Askew album.
This is exactly who I am as an artist today.
And possibly the last great lockdown album as well.
Potentially. Will I do another album after this? I don't know. But it's been a pleasure making it. There haven't really been many frustrations along the way. It's taken about 6 years, but it was also pretty much finished in 2019, 2020. And the amount of work that's gone on since then, yes, there are two or three new tracks that were built from scratch since then, but predominantly it's just been fine-tuning and, we're working with Joris Vaughan. He said something really interesting to me the other day, which is so true. He said 90% of making a track gets done almost in the first session, and yet the last 10% of making that track takes up 90% of the time. So of the total amount of time that you put into making a track, 90% of it is that last 10%.
I mean, as you say, it's 16 tracks. That is, it's a bit of a big boy, isn't it?
It's heavy, yeah.
Were you anticipating that was going to be the case like 6 years back, or were you kind of ever looking at like, maybe 11 or 12?
I wasn't really conscious of it. I sent an early copy of the album incomplete to Ruben Duron, who obviously, and his advice to me was to split it and make 2 albums. And anyone who is speaking to you from a music perspective, from a like streaming performance perspective, would take the notion that 9, 10, maximum 11 is the optimal number now for an album. But there's no tracks on this album that I want to take off. This is the album. So whether it gets 10 streams or hundreds of thousands or whatever, or millions, who knows? I can't. You put your music out into the ether and it does what it does. But this is what I want this album to be, and I'm fucking proud of it. I like it. I like the flow of the music. I like the story that it tells.
Truly.
And it is what I want people to associate my name with.
And how did you find the writing process? What tracks were coming together quickest? What tracks took a little bit longer? What was the first one you finished off last, etc.?
There's a track in there which is already out, one of the singles, pre-album singles, called Running in the Dark. That track came together super quickly. It was actually, I sampled a vocal off a record that was on Armada. The vocal came from that. And so I was trying to get Armada to let me license the vocal so that I could release it as a remix of this track. The original track is I think it's a deep house record at 124 beats per minute, right? And now it's a ripping 140, psytrance with a vocal on it. And the original artists, who obviously don't want to be associated with psytrance. Answers
one of my later questions.
Right? They don't want to be associated with psytrance. So they said, well, look, we got the sample, the vocal, from a Splice sample pack. So if you go and get that sample pack, you've got the vocal anyway.
Right.
So I was like, right, okay, that's exactly what I'll do.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, so that track came together in a day. There was fine tuning and pissing around, but essentially that was a day. But there are other tracks on there, like Wild Horse with Shelby Merry, that I've been working on that for 3 years.
So the album starts in a very meaningful way with Gravedigger. And there's a speech therein that, what's the meaning behind that? Is that you? Trying to remember now.
No, I know it. It's just how to put it into words without compromising my position.
It's a very purposeful, meaningful, heartfelt speech.
Yeah, it's essentially the relationship in management. It's telling the story of if you listen to the lyrics in a literal sense, it's essentially like a gladiator-esque person going up against an unfathomable force, and he's ill-equipped. He doesn't have any weapons, but he's fucking brutal. And he charges into battle and annihilates the enemy. And essentially the duality is, it's the constant battle that management is.
Right.
So it's getting up every morning and going to war against these
darker forces.
uncompromising darker forces that are just, it's in some ways it's a war of attrition. But if you don't get out there, if you don't face everything head on, you'll die.
Now,
so slight parody, but yeah, that's the real meaning behind it.
Duality, as you say.
Yeah.
Now, when I was listening to Push It for the first time, it really struck me was that it's got this kind of dichotomy between like a lot of darkness, but then just a few elements of melody and kind of like to offset it in a your mind as a producer, what is the perfect kind of percentage balance between kind of the darker sounds and, you know, a bit of harmony?
Well, there's two different ways to look at it. You could be looking at it from the perspective of a producer or from the perspective of a DJ. And I think from the perspective of a DJ, you have to think about not only what works on a dance floor, but understanding the notion that the majority of the people that you're playing to are quite often high on ecstasy, and you know, adding melody in certain areas and you know, having these head down driving moments that are intense and build intensity through layers of percussion or acids opening up or and ride cymbals coming on, bringing intensity at the top, through to lush chords and melodic moments. You know, you can manipulate people's experience that they're having through the chemicals they put in their body, and also through the audio and sensory and visual, you know, things that you're controlling. And I think for me, I always like melody. I have made some records that are straight up techno that have no melody in, that I love and love playing, that are really percussive. But it's weird that you should ask about that track, because that's probably my favorite track on the album. And it's the one that I love playing. I just love playing that record, and I can't stop playing it in every set. But I got the track to basically finished, wasn't happy with it. I sent a copy of it to Rich Solarstone, who was looking for music for his compilation series, and he loved it and wanted to put that version on the compilation album. And I said, I hate it. I've played it out once and it sounded terrible. And he said, well, look, I love it. I really want to put it out on the album. And I said, all right, well, you can put it out, but just put it as the pure mix or something. And then I spent a lot more time working on the original until I got it to the stage where I loved it. And then I started working with Tom Porcel in Germany, who's an amazing mix and master engineer. So I exported all the stems and said, here's the track. It's absolutely finished. Doesn't need anything else, but I want you to do the final mix and master, because I'm lost on that. I'm on version fucking 40 and it's just not sounding right. And I gave it to him and he came back, and I think we had maybe one or two back and forwards. And then suddenly I was like, right, you're now doing all my mix and masters. This is brilliant. This is amazing. And it just sounds fat live. It's amazing.
So UFO is the next track on. Is that some type of titular tribute to your Club UFO days in Warminster?
Absolutely, yeah. It's entirely a tribute to the UFO Club from Warminster, and is just straight up industrial techno.
Have you ever Googled UFO Club Warminster?
I have.
What did you come up with? Was it?
Well, I mean, old flyers from it. You know what it stood for?
Yeah, I do. I just couldn't. I was astonished that that's where it had kind of came from. I mean, books have been written, haven't they?
Yeah, it stood for "You Fuck Off."
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. That's it stood for "You Fuck Off." It was like a big fuck the system, you know, I'm guessing. Weirdly enough, Andrew Pennell, who ran the UFO Club, wasn't a massive dance music fan. He was into the Smiths and the Mission. He loved the Mission, and I said to him, why, how come you're putting on these raves for 2,500 people when you're not really into the music? He said, well, because I like standing there going, seeing 2,500 people going bananas and going, I did that. I was like, all right, fair enough. But yeah, it was absolutely a tribute to that golden era of Wiltshire raving.
Right. So 0.00 comes off like the classic overture track, and yet we find it 5 tracks into the album.
Yeah.
Where was that you just kind of fucking with the system, or
the album
middle finger to the album?
The album originally started with it,
right?
Which is why it was called 0000, because the time code. The album starts with that track, but then it went from that track into Gravedigger, and I sort of thought, hang on a second, if you do this, people might have lost interest, and really I want them to be hooked in with Gravedigger. Gravedigger is the and one of the earlier manifestations of Gravedigger had like a battle scene with sword fights and shit going on, but in the end I thought, you know what, actually I need some stuff to break up the monotony, because I it's not monotonous for me. This is the music I love, but when I played it to a few friends, they're like, fuck, the album is just banging, banging, banging. There's no let up. So I thought, well, maybe I'll just move that track somewhere in the middle to break it up a little bit and enable me to transition from UFO, which is super heavy, into something more,
The French singer-songwriter Lionheart is vocaling Be Careful What You Wish For. What did you hear in his voice or writing that appealed to you on like an album inclusion level?
Senna D, who is Lionheart, he and I did a track a long time ago called Nothing Left Between Us, and he's been a mate of mine for a while, and I just wanted to have something from him on the album. He sent me that track, and I've been sat on this track for years. It's almost quite embarrassing how long I've had this record. And I just thought, traditionally I would take the vocals, I would speed it up to a BPM that is more compatible to what I do in clubs and in DJ sets. But actually I thought, you know what, no, I'm just going to leave the BPM as it is and just build something around it that is purely for the album. A more a listening track, more letting the vocal really be the headliner out the front, and bringing the levels of the music right back a bit, so that it's just there to support the vocal, taking more of a pop approach to it than clubby stuff.
And I think that the same could be said to some degree with Monica on Take a Breath. It's a very kind of sweet, beautiful voice.
Yeah, she's not from the dance world at all. She's quite a famous Sikh vocalist, and who is, quite often, I hope I don't have this wrong, I think sort of singing about quite religious themes, and so singing on this track was, I'm not sure how she perceived it, but essentially I had no idea who she was, but I was introduced to her on a family holiday. I was sat around the dining room table, and some friends of ours were telling me about a friend of theirs called Monica, who's an amazing vocalist, and they were showing me clips on their phone of a concert they went to, and they filmed her, and her voice was ridiculous. And I said, do you think she'd ever be up for singing on top of a electronic track? And they were like, well, we're not sure, but why not? We'll put you in touch with her. And they did, and she was very receptive, and I had no idea what she would do. I said to her, look, I just, do whatever you want to do on top of this, but if it's going to be spoken word, you're going to need to translate it for me, so that I'm not putting out an album that's saying something that I don't believe in. But she did this thing, and actually I didn't have to ask her to redo anything. Some bits I cut up and moved around, but it was just great. I loved it, and it was like, fuck, this is brilliant. Yeah. So with These Dogs Trust No One, amazing title aside. Thank you.
Sounds like it kind of has a bit of sampling going on in there. I don't know. It's
potentially there's some sampling cut up and moved around, but the story behind that track is the vocal, which is me, is I made that track in COVID. I was getting up every day. I was going out on like 5-6 hour walks to just get out, taking my dog out in these beautiful hills around here in Wiltshire, and going on these epic long walks, headphones on, listening to albums and stuff. And there were clearly loads of other guys that I kept passing who I knew from living around here, and they were out doing the same. When we were miles away from where we live, they're going on these big, long, epic walks because why not, right? And so the lyrics in the song are men passing dogs, walking men, right? And that's what it was. Because even though we knew each other, no one stopped to have a chat. You know, we were all in the moment with headphones on, either stoned or pissed or whatever. But there was no stopping to have a chat. We would acknowledge each other and then walk on. The dogs would have their customary sniff of each other's arseholes and move on. Yeah, standard. That's their way of shaking hands. And off we would go. And that's what that song is about.
Right. And Organism, to my ears, sounded, if there was a track on there that had just a little bit more of that throwback to, you know, the kind of the early Discover days, you know, did you feel that there was a necessity to have something like that, or were you just taken by the mood, or?
Yeah, I probably did feel there was a necessity. And in fact, there was another track that was going to be on the album called Home, which in the end I took off, and Organism replaced it. But yeah, it was definitely, that's exactly, you've nailed it. I was thinking of the Discover period and fans. You know, I still love that kind of music, that old sort of Paul Van Dyke plucks.
And when you're putting melody like that into tracks, what kind of emotions are you trying to trip off in people? Is it more to the kind of like the happy, the sad, the traveller, kind of...
I think generally when it comes to melodic music, I prefer minor chords. I like things to be melancholic, but with a overtone, with a slight sense of hope.
Yeah, bit of optimism.
Yeah, but never major chords, never like happy angels in heaven sort of stuff.
So what can you tell us about Kaleidoscope and Hear Me? Because he seems to be kind of he spells the S with a dollar, which when I ran it through Discogs told me that he was pretty new to the game. So how did you come across him?
Well, yeah, that profile name doesn't exist. So he's actually a hip hop, R&B, soul vocalist who's quite prevalent called Rufus.
Right.
And the track started off as a track that he had. I heard the vocal. It was more in that R&B world. I was like, shit, I can make this into something mental in trance. And so I worked on that track. I do this sort of annual writer retreat in January where I go away for 2 weeks and I just work on music. And I had the vocal with me in January. I worked on it. I sent him and his manager, who's a very good friend of mine, like an early sketch. They loved it. They came back and like, yeah. And then, you know, because I was there for 2 weeks and I was working on it daily, I was sending them regular updates. They were really buzzing about it. And then I came back and I worked on it more, sent it again. Yeah, we really like it. And then we did the deal, signed it. You know, they got paid in advance and it was all done and dusted. And so then I spent a load of money having the final mix and master done, and really happy with it. And I sent them, I said, here it is, the final version, mixed and mastered. And then they turned around and said, yeah, we want to pull out of this. And I was like, what are you talking about? And they said, well, we sort of think that having a record of this nature now, after much deliberation, would break the flow when we are focused on more the R&B and pop stuff for Rufus. And I said, well, that's great, but you could have said this at any stage in the last however many months we've been working on this record. And also I've got a signed contract. You know, you've already signed a contract and I'm not pulling out. So a compromise would be, why don't you guys come up with an alias? And then it won't be on his Spotify profile. It will be, you know, just a completely new alias. And then it's up to you whether at any stage in the future you want to associate yourself with it or not. But that's a compromise that I'm prepared to make because I just love the record. I love the vocal, but I don't mind if you want to change the name that's on it.
Yeah. I mean, you don't want to trade on his name, you know, it's
I'm fine with it. I don't, genres in general, I think are are kind of almost a thing of the past. And I think a lot of that you've got to give credit to the likes of Amelie Lenz, Charlotte DeWitt, the girls that blew up in techno that came out and started playing trance at techno gigs when the snooty old guard were like, what are you doing? And they're like, yeah, well, we're just playing records that take the roof off. We don't care about genres. And as a result, I don't really care what genre someone is from in terms of a collaboration. It's just, are they talented and does it sound great? And so, yeah, I've got no problem whether Rufus wanted to have it as Rufus or whether he wanted to have it as Kaleidoscope. But funnily enough, I went to a barbecue on Saturday, and which was being hosted by Rufus's manager, Justin, and Rufus was there as well. And I think he was a bit nervous because, it got quite brittle, the conversation. Yep. So I think he was a bit nervous coming, but I went up and gave him a hug and said, don't worry about it. It's just business. It's just the music industry. There's highs and lows, but you signed the fucking contract.
And a perfect solution at the end of the day.
Well, yeah, we'll just do it under an alias. And now actually he was like super enthusiastic and just said, well, let's do some more stuff under an alias. And I'm like, yeah, why not?
Showed him the way. So When Darkness Comes, again, brings Shelby Merry back into the frame.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, typically kind of like beautiful vocals and, harder end trance, are kind of, I would imagine that they're at the tougher end of, problems to square, to get it absolutely right. Do you have an approach that you take every time when you're trying to put like a very gorgeous vocal with tougher sounds, or is it a case by case basis? How do you?
I think in the context of Shelby Merry and probably wider, what I'm looking for in vocals is that slightly dark and melancholic thing. And even though that record is quite uplifting, Shelby Merry and her approach to singer-songwriting and how she goes about it and the lyrics that she writes tends to be quite melancholic with a sense of hope. Yeah. She's very good at fucking breaking people's hearts. And so there is a compatibility. That's actually an older record that we did together that I released a few years ago, but I wanted it to be on this album. And I discovered Shelby from a TV show called Final Space that my son, at the very beginning of COVID, was trying to persuade me to watch. He was, 13 at the time, 12, 13. And he was watching this TV show, which was a cartoon on Adult Swim. And he was like, you've got to watch it. You've got to watch it. And I was like, okay. And watched the first episode. And it was a bit, American, screamy, shouty. And then I just, by the time I got onto the second episode, I was like, fucking hell, this is well written. Fucking hell, it's powerful. But the score, the music is unbelievable. It's so well put together. It's amazing. It's such a good show. You should watch it. It's called Final Space. And the 2 or 3 of the main tracks in it had this female voice that was just like breaking my heart every time I heard it. And so I found out it was Shelby Merry. I found her music on Spotify. And then I found her on Instagram, reached out to her. That track, When the Darkness Comes, was actually a track that was on Final Space called When Darkness Comes. I just took the vocal and built an entirely new record around it, but and changed one element of the title so that we could do so. But it was a heartbreaker in the film and in the TV show where it was used and how it was used in the context of the story and the narrative. It was just like, wow. And I just want to put beats on that and play it in a club. And that's what Shelby does so well. She breaks people's hearts with her words and her songwriting. She's incredible.
Contrastingly, I guess, Aces High is probably one of the most trance tracks on the album. Yeah. Came out on Armand last year.
Yeah.
If we were looking through, in the context of a John Askew 6-hour set, which hour would that fall into? Where would that come out?
It varies. I've done 6-hour sets where I've played that track in the first 4 tracks. and I've played others where I've put it at the end or in the middle. It can go anywhere, but it's definitely a track that is a bit more traditional John Askew sounding, and it's a track that works anywhere. Like it can take off. You know, like you play that record, and the bit at the beginning where it drops before the kick and the bass kick in, it just takes off. It's one of my favorite tracks to play out. It's probably, I would say, it's a track that I need to make. I need to make more tracks like that, I think.
Yeah. So that takes us to I Want Your Soul with Sinful Biz. I've got written here, does John Askew really want our souls? But I don't know. That's a question you want to address this afternoon. Or moreover, maybe you could tell us a little bit about Sinful Biz, how you connected, how you came together, and how he ended up with this amazing vocal on this track.
Yeah, he is a guy called Gareth Williams, who's been at loads of our gigs. I see him around a lot. He produces, his sound is sort of somewhere between techno and progressive. It's very powerful. And he sent me some demos for my other label, Deep in Thought. This was one of them, and I was like, holy shit, this is good. It was like 128, 130 beats per minute, more progressive. And I said, dude, where the vocal came from a sample pack, so there was no rights to clear, and I was just like, can I do a version, and we make that version the original mix, and we make your version that you did the remix, and we release it as an EP on my label 7. And he was totally up for it, so I worked on it and finished it during the January writer retreat.
Right.
And that's what came out. It's very powerful vocal. But again, that record doesn't really have like a big riff. It doesn't really have a big melodic element to it. All of the melody, all of the big stuff in that track is the vocal.
Right.
And I just wanted to put stripped back, banging beats with some other elements behind the vocal, but always let the vocal be the headline element.
Yeah. So Wild Horses is Shelby's third and last track on the album.
Yeah.
When she's in the writing process, at what point does she share with you what she's up to? And at what point, how much does she tell you about what the meaning behind the song is for her? And then how does that affect how you produce it?
The 3 records I've done with Shelby have all been tracks that she's already finished and done. So when I hear them, they are more like band orientated. So it'll be like traditional drums, organ or piano, guitar, bass. It's band music. So I just listen to it and go, shit, I can do something with that, and it's perfect. And so she just sends me the vocal, and I build it from there. But Wild Horse is the closing track on the album. It's definitely one of my favorite tracks from the album. And when I started working on it, I started putting some like clubby beats and shit behind it. I was like, fuck, that's just, you're cheapening the record from what it was originally doing. And so I went out in my car, and when I just started the car, what came on automatically just playing off my phone on Spotify was Massive Attack's album Blue Lines. And so I listened to that album end to end, and then I came back and I just started working on that track with Massive Attack Blue Lines just in my head. So it's more of an approach to the I wouldn't ever dream to compare myself with the awesomeness of Massive Attack, but it was Massive Attack inspired when I sat down to make that record.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Good stuff. Well, my $1 million question at the end was going to be, will you do another album? Say you do. What year are we looking at?
Well, in the process of making this 16-track album, I have already got another album almost ready to go.
Right.
It's just whether I release it as an album or whether it should just be broken up into just singles and fed out, dripped out. But there is an album pretty much ready to go. I need 2 or 3 vocals for it, and it's, everything's to 90%. And as we talked about earlier, it's the last 10% that takes 90% of the time. But I'm playing a lot of these tracks out as demos, as IDs, and they are working. So
if we say 2025 hyphen some point in the future.
I think I could fine tune it all in 25 and release it in 26. But it's just whether there's any point, whether there's any purpose or point to it, or
I guess the next 6 months are going to tell you everything you need to know.
Yeah. Fingers crossed.
And on that note, that's all the questions I have for you, Mr. Askew.
A pleasure talking with you.
And you.
Yeah, thanks, mate.
No, it's been great. It's been great.